Welcome to the SafeSimpleSound podcast, where we believe that financial clarity isn't about chasing the wind, it's about building a house that can withstand it. Our approach to financial planning is designed to create both and solutions for the contradictions families face every day. You don't have to choose between growth and safety. With the right architecture, you can build for both. Today, we are exploring a concept we call the math of togetherness. It's the third part of our Understanding Risk Measurement series, and it addresses a silent problem that sits in thousands of portfolios right now. It is the same topic we recently wrote about on the Safe Simple Sound blog because it represents one of the most significant gaps between what investors think they have and what they actually have. Let me ask you a question that we often pose within our practice. If you own 5 different mutual funds, are you diversified? Take a moment with that. 5 different funds, different names, maybe even different brokerage firms. Most people, quite naturally, would say, yes, of course, I haven't put all my eggs in one basket. But based on our analysis of portfolio mechanics, the math might say no. In fact, the math might say you have simply put your eggs in 5 different baskets that are all sitting in the exact same truck. If the truck hits a bump, every single egg feels it exactly the same way. In today's episode, we're going to dismantle one of the most common either-or traps in investing: the choice between high growth, which usually requires concentration, and low risk, which usually implies broad diversification. Investors often feel paralyzed by this choice. They ask themselves, do I bet big to get rich, or do I spread it out and accept mediocre returns? Through our Safe Simple Sound methodology, we want to offer you a different perspective, a both-and solution. This episode will show you how you can pursue growth and maintain structural safety, but only if you understand the underlying relationships between your assets. It's a concept called correlation. Whether you are a seasoned investor or just starting to organize your family's wealth, this episode will give you the tools to spot the difference between a portfolio that is truly diverse and one that is just cluttered. Let's step into the safe, simple, and sound world of portfolio architecture. In the earlier episodes of our series, we redefined what risk actually looks like, and we discussed how to prepare for market corrections. Now, we need to talk about the structure itself. From a safe, simple, sound perspective, a portfolio isn't just a pile of assets. It is an ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, the health of the whole depends on how the individual parts interact with one another. This brings us to the science of asset relationships. In the financial world, we use terms like covariance and correlation. Now, typically, when financial professionals start throwing around words like covariance, eyes glaze over. It sounds complex, it sounds intimidating, but let's make it simple. These terms are just fancy ways of measuring a relationship. They answer the question, how do 2 different things move in relation to each other? Think about the relationships in your own life. First, imagine a correlation of positive 1.0. In our framework, we call these best friends. These assets go to the party together, and they leave together. They hold hands. If one is happy, the other is happy. If one trips and falls, the other goes down with them. A classic example from the stock market might be 2 large technology companies, like Google and Microsoft. While they are different companies, they live in the same neighborhood. When the tech sector is booming, they both tend to rise. When the tech sector takes a hit, they both tend to fall. Second, imagine a correlation of 0. These are strangers. They're in the same room, but they ignore each other completely. What asset A does has absolutely no bearing on what asset B does. They are independent. Third, and this is where the magic happens, imagine a correlation of negative 1.0. In our practice, we jokingly call these enemies. But in a portfolio, they are actually your best allies. When one stands up, the other sits down. When one zigs, the other zags. Now, why does this matter? Because true diversification, the kind that aligns with principles of safety and soundness, isn't about owning more things. It is about owning different things. Here's a pattern we frequently observe through our S3 practice. An investor will come to the table with a portfolio that looks robust on paper. They have a tech ETF, they have a large cap growth fund, they have an S&P 500 index fund, and maybe a specific sector fund, like semiconductors. They look at their statement and see 4 or 5 different line items. They feel safe, But when we run the analysis on those assets, we find that they all have a correlation of nearly 1.0. They are all best friends. They are all singing the same song. We call this diworsification. You have added complexity, more tax forms, more fees, more login passwords, without adding any structural safety. You have 3 or 4 names for the exact same risk. This is where the safe component of our framework is so vital. We want you to feel secure, not because you have a lot of accounts, but because you understand the mechanics of how they support one another. We also use a tool called beta. If correlation measures the relationship between 2 friends, beta measures the personality of the asset itself compared to the overall market. Let's use a simple analogy here. A beta of 1.0 means you are the market. If the market goes up 10%, you go up 10%. A beta of 1.5 means you are a roller coaster. You are sensitive. If the market goes up 10%, you might go up 15%. But if the market drops 10%, you might drop 15%. It's high adrenaline. A beta of 0.5 means you are a tortoise. You are steady. You still move forward, but you aren't as rattled by the bumps in the road. Many investors we see unknowingly carry a weighted portfolio beta of 1.2 or higher. That means, without realizing it, they have built a portfolio that is riskier than the stock market itself. They are taking on extra volatility, often without the extra returns to justify it. From a SafeSimpleSound perspective, this violates the principle of soundness. Taking unintentional risk is not a strategy, it's a gamble. We want to move from gambling to engineering. To really understand how these principles, correlation and beta, play out in real life, let me share a hypothetical scenario that illustrates the math of togetherness. Please note that while this story is created for educational purposes to demonstrate our S3 framework, it reflects very real patterns we see when families attempt to apply these principles on their own. This is a fictional example, but the lessons are. Let's imagine a fictional couple. Let's call them the Mercers. The Mercers are diligent savers. They have worked hard for 30 years. Over that time, they have accumulated a significant nest egg across various 401k and IRAs. When the Mercers look at their financial picture, they feel good. They have an account at a large brokerage firm, another account from an old job, and a current 401k. Inside those accounts, they have selected about 8 different funds. In this hypothetical situation, Mr. Mercer is particularly fond of technology. He read years ago that tech is the future, so he picked funds that sounded aggressive and forward-thinking. Mrs. Mercer, wanting to be prudent, selected funds that were labeled growth and income and market opportunities. They come to the SafeSimpleSound practice looking for a second opinion. They tell us, we think we're pretty well diversified. We have 8 funds across 3 institutions. This is the moment where we apply the simple lens of our framework. We take all those tickers, all those symbols, and we put them into our correlation matrix. We look under the hood. Here's what this hypothetical analysis reveals. Despite having 8 different funds, the Mercer's portfolio has a weighted correlation of 0.92. Remember our scale? 1.0 is best friends. 0.92 means that 92% of the time, all 8 of their funds are moving in the exact same direction. Furthermore, their weighted beta is 1.4. So here is the reality for the fictional Mercers. They don't own a diversified portfolio. They own a leveraged bet on the U.S. technology sector. Now consider the emotional impact of this, the safe aspect. In a bull market, when everything is going up, the Mercers feel like geniuses. Their beta of 1.4 means they are outperforming the market. They feel safe, they feel sound. But what happens in a hypothetical market correction? Let's say the S&P 500 drops 20 cents, a standard bear market event. Because of their high beta and high correlation, the Mercers don't drop 20%. Their portfolio mathematically is likely to drop closer to 28% or 30%. And because every single fund is correlated, there is no place to hide. Every line item on the statement is red. This is where panic sets in, and panic is the enemy of sound decision-making. While the Mercer story is fictional, it demonstrates a critical flaw in traditional, common-sense investing. We often confuse activity with diversity. From a SafeSimpleSound perspective, how would we address this? How do we apply the math of togetherness to fix the Mercer's architecture? We don't necessarily need to sell everything and start over. That wouldn't be simple. Instead, we look for what we call green light relationships. We need to introduce assets into the Mercer's portfolio that act as enemies to their current holdings. If they hold high-octane growth stocks, we might introduce intermediate-term treasuries, or perhaps managed futures, or specific real assets that don't care what Apple or Amazon are doing today. By combining assets that don't like each other, we create a portfolio that loves them. Imagine adding an asset that has a correlation of -0.2 to their current holdings. Now, when the tech market has a bad day, this new asset might stay flat or even go up slightly. The result? The volatility of the whole portfolio becomes less than the volatility of the individual parts. That is the magic of the math. Through this example, you can see how thinking applies. We aren't trying to predict which stock will win. That's impossible. We are trying to engineer a ride that the Mercers can stay on. If we can lower their beta from 1.4 to 0.8, they transform from being a roller coaster to being closer to that trustworthy tortoise. They might give up a tiny bit of the highest highs, but they avoid the lowest lows. And more importantly, they stay invested because the ride isn't terrifying. Whether you are facing this exact scenario or something similar, the principle remains. Structural integrity comes from how the pieces fit together, not just how shiny the individual pieces are. So, how do we translate this high-level math into something simple and actionable for your family? We believe that complexity is the enemy of execution. If you can't understand your portfolio on a single page, it's probably too complicated. A simple portfolio isn't necessarily a small one, it's a clean one. Through our S3 practice, we have simplified the matrix math into what we call the traffic light grid. Imagine looking at your portfolio not as a list of numbers, but as a grid of lights. Red lights, these are your duplicates. If you have a large cap growth fund and a tech ETF and you put them in the grid, the box turns red. Stop! You are duplicating risk. You are paying twice for the same ride. Green lights, these are your diversifiers. These are the relationships where one asset zigs and the other zags. When you pair high-quality bonds with high-growth stocks, you often get a green light. This signals a healthy structural tension that holds the roof up. We also look for beta buddies. If you have a high-energy asset, something with a beta of 1.5, it needs a calm buddy. It needs a chaperone. You pair that high-risk asset with something that has a beta of 0.2 or even negative beta. The goal of the SafeSimpleSound approach is to ensure that your portfolio is filled with green lights. We want to see that you have purposely chosen assets that cover each other's blind spots. This aligns with the principle of stewardship. Good stewardship isn't just about accumulation. It's about preservation. It's about ensuring that the wealth you are building has a structural defense against the storms that will inevitably come. When you look at your portfolio this way, you stop worrying about picking the winners. You start focusing on building the team. On a football team, you don't want 11 quarterbacks. You need linemen, you need kickers, you need receivers. They are different. They have different body types, different skills, and different jobs. But together, they win the game. That is the math of togetherness. As we wrap up this episode on the mathematics of portfolio construction, let's revisit the core truth. True diversification is about the quality of the relationships between your assets, not the quantity of the assets themselves. We've covered the danger of diworsification, owning many things that act the same way. We've explored the concepts of correlation and beta through the hypothetical story of the Mercers. And we've introduced the idea of the traffic light grid to spot redundancies. From a SafeSimpleSound perspective, this provides the stability we look for. It allows you to sleep well at night, knowing that while one part of your portfolio might be struggling, another part is doing its job to hold the line. This episode draws from our recent blog post titled The Math of Togetherness, which you can find at SafeSimpleSound.com. On the website accompanying that post, we have developed a specific resource offer, the True Diversification Correlation Matrix PDF. This includes our traffic light grid and the Beta Buddy worksheet. These are the same types of frameworks we use within our practice to analyze complex estates. We have made them available to you so that you can sit down at your kitchen table, look at your ticker symbols, and instantly spot if you are actually diversified or just cluttered. If today's S3 insights resonate with your family's situation, if you suspect you might have a portfolio full of red lights, we invite you to explore what financial planning could look like through our Safe, Simple, Sound practice. But either way, whether you engage with our practice or simply use the tools we provide, you are now equipped with a capability. You understand that the math of togetherness is the key to unlocking both growth and safety. Thank you for listening to the Safe, Simple, Sound podcast. Here's to building a financial future that is safe, simple, and sound.